Hello, everybody, multitudes, both here on location and everywhere in the world. I hope everybody had a very meaningful holiday season, beginning Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Simchas Torah, the entire spectrum of life, from renewal to sanctity to joy to ecstasy. And now we, as we are in Rosh Chodesh, the new month of Cheshvan, we unpack all these bundles in the coming year. And as such, I would like to talk about this week's chapter, but especially in light of the events in Israel, which unfortunately you don't want to find hints to it, but there's a flood of terror taking place in Israel as we speak. And of course this chapter is about floods and arcs. So I want to begin by dedicating the class to Reza Bas Shmuel Dov and Tzvi Ben Yitzchak, the loving grandparents of our good friend Adrian Deutsch from Budapest, who I'm sure is watching the class, as are many other people, and dedicated to her loving parents, grandparents, but as well to extend our hearts and our prayers to all our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land who are under attack simply for one reason, because they're Jewish, which really means that all Jews are under attack. And the truth is, wise people understand that if the Jews are under attack, the entire human race is under attack. So our prayers and everything we do, our study, our additional charity, additional psalms, and study of Torah in honor of our, as I said, brothers and sisters, is the way we strengthen each other. And just like there needs to be fought a physical war to do whatever it does to protect innocent citizens, there's also, every battle also has a spiritual side to it. Because at the end of the day, battles also require a mindset, a set of confidence, trust, and in many ways, many of these terrorist acts are beyond the damage done and lives tragically lost. They also create a demoralization and a sense of embattlement and fear, which can be just as damaging as even death itself. Not to minimize, obviously, the killing of any individual. And unfortunately, as I have been hearing from people, my friends and relatives and others in Israel, that's the state of affairs right now. However, we've been around for thousands of years, and we know and completely confident in the verse, Hina Layon v'Layishin Shem Yisrael, that the protector of Israel does not rest or sleep. And especially Einei Hashem Elokecha ba, in the land of Israel, God's particular providence and eyes are always focused there. So though we may not always see it in a revealed way, but we invoke that. God should protect the people there more than anywhere, and there should be no more such attacks and fears. And of course, the Israeli army and police should do what they have to do in the full, without any zero tolerance, like any normal country would do when its citizens are under attack. And we have to do our part in reinforcing and fortifying our spiritual connection with each other. And the best way to counter an attack on a Jew, the best way to counter any type of vulnerability, is to strengthen our connection with each other, which is through Avos Yisrael, Achdus Yisrael, which means through our own unity. And if ever there's an excuse needed, that we should be less bickering with each other and less lashon hara, less slandering and less negativity, here's an opportunity. You know, when you're fighting a battle, even if soldiers may not always agree with each other, there's no time for disagreements when you're fighting a war. It creates a certain sense of urgency. So if we really felt that we're one with the people in Israel and they're under attack, we have to feel mobilized. There's no time for pettiness and all the other narishkeit nonsense that we get involved in at times. We have to be focused in a very urgent set of seriousness and which transcends our differences and transcends all the unfortunate divisiveness that plagues Jewish people. And we've always been told the real secret to Jewish survival and Jewish success has always been unity. There's a very painful but must be mentioned episode in the times of David, King David, that even though he was fighting a battle with Avshalom, and he was on the right side, and his archenemy was on the wrong side, but because the soldiers and the people of David were divisive, and the people of Avshalom were united, there were lives lost on David's side, because when there's no unity, even if you're fighting the right just cause, you don't have the strength. Unity creates a certain power and synergy. And sometimes the enemy wins tragically when we're not united. On a very basic level, the best way to really fight the best way to fight a war is to get your enemy and their army to fight with each other, because then they get divided, they become splintered, and there's no focus. And that's the best way, is to create havoc and chaos. So the best power and tool is to fight any type of challenge has always been for the Jewish people, our unity. And it's something each of us can do something about that in our communities, in our homes, in our families, to not tolerate the usual unfortunate, as I said, bickering or divisiveness or critique, judgmentalism, and all the other stuff that comes, unfortunately, when Jews sometimes stoop to their lowest common denominator. So here's a time where we have to rise to the occasion and rise in a place where we unite. And when you're united, as the analogy given in the Medrash, in the parsha we read always before Rosh Hashanah, so it says, Atin mitzovim hayem kulcham, today you stand all together. And hayem refers to Rosh Hashanah. And of course, the unity of Rosh Hashanah. So the Medrash gives a beautiful analogy of stalks of grain, of wheat. That when each stalk is separate, it's very easy to break and very easy to destroy. But when you put many, many stalks together, even though individually they're not strong, but when they stand together, it's very difficult to take a bushel of wheat or a bushel of grain and do anything to it. That's the power of unity. Some of you may be familiar, a few years ago there was a very popular film called The March of the Penguins. It was like an inside look at the penguins in Antarctica. And it was just fascinating to see how they unite and they protect each other in the 90-degree below zero Arctic temperatures, or Antarctic temperatures, I should say. How they constantly alternate, because what they do is they huddle together. That way they keep warmer. But the problem is the cold, of course, is on the outside rim. So they constantly alternate who's on the outside, and they keep on alternating throughout the entire winter. I mean, there are other fascinating insights, just lessons you learn of their dedication to their children and how many miles they travel just to bring back some food, etc. But one of the things is that unity. I don't know if you ever see, when you see geese flying, they always fly in a V formation. And scientists always wondered why a V formation. You could see it's like almost a perfect formation as they fly. Today we know, because due to the aerodynamics, the geese, the ones that when they fly in a V formation, they maximize the wind, the wingspan that comes from the other geese when they fly that way. So they maximize their efforts and minimize their exertion that way. This is when people work together, when entities work together. The same thing you learn about ant colonies. Nature is a tremendous teacher about many things, and especially about the unity, the power of unity. Ants, the unities are tremendous, how they delegate and how they all coordinate. And you don't need anything more than just look into the mirror. Your own human body, a healthy human body, is the greatest miracle of all. You have 75 trillion cells, hundreds, thousands of systems at work. All separately, one would never know they could work together, and then they all come together, and one foot doesn't slip on the other, thank God. And there's a coordination just when you put a piece of food or a drink in your mouth. How many steps have to work perfectly for that food to become part of your system? And every step takes it, and it fulfills its role. So it's like a cosmic symphony, where each musical note is indispensable, and each one needs the other, and each one complements the other. The human beings, however, we have free will, so we could choose not to play the music together. When it comes a time of crisis, a time of challenge, our greatest strength is accessing that unity. There's not enough that can be said about the power of that. And that's perhaps why the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, and all the negative forces line up all their energy to make sure that it doesn't happen, because they know the stakes are high. So if people want to know what they can do, that's the first thing you can do. And do it in action, by gathering together with others, reconciling with people you may have had some conflict with, overlooking stupid, petty things that often cause us to be so apart, and above all, advocating and nurturing unity and oneness among us all, and of course in a simple way of just simply inviting guests to your home, charity, helping others, understanding that we're part of one larger entity. And don't kid yourself, that has direct impact even on events in Israel. I understand you say, well, how is that going to stop someone from pulling a knife out, God forbid? It creates a spiritual unity, and spiritual unity translates into physical. This, of course, goes hand in hand with everything that needs to be done on a practical level. Police and law enforcement, army, to do anything to stop and to, more than stop, and also punish those that are responsible, etc., etc. So that's an overall statement. But going back to the theme, so when you see a wave of terror, a deluge of raging floodwaters, now in Israel, not just buses as it once was, but anybody, any town, suddenly someone can just attack randomly a Jew. This is nothing less than a flood in a certain way. So it goes into the question that, what do you do to protect yourself from things like that? I mentioned unity, but I'm going to elaborate some more about it, and also especially this year, as you may know, is a Shnas Hakel. It's a year that on Sukkot, during the time of the temple, every 7th year, the year following the sabbatical, the Shemitah year, was a gathering, a year of assembly, where the king, with the nation, would go together, the Nashim, V'taf, men, women, and children, come together in Jerusalem, and the king would read for them sections of the Torah in order to inculcate in them a deeper sense of awe of God that would last for their entire lives. So, of course, we commemorate this every 7th year, something the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, was very big into, which, of course, emphasizes even more the unity that's necessary, while also maintaining our diversity. But it all also connects very much to this week's chapter, because as we'll discuss, we have in it a formula, a time-tested and a timeless formula of how to deal with all types of challenges. So let's spell out some of the challenges that life poses. We all know in our own hearts and our own life experiences the different challenges. I just mentioned one that's facing now the Jewish people in Israel. And as I said, that's an attack on Jewish people everywhere. And we should never make that mistake and think that it's only their problem, not ours. And it is a deluge. And besides, as I said, the physical threat, there's the psychological threat and the emotional and the fear involved and what's going to be and all that comes with it. But then taking it to the microcosm, because in Jewish thought, especially mystical thought, everything's microcosm, macrocosm. A large problem may be the problem of a community, but there's also individual challenges. Who doesn't have challenges in the context of different voices inside of you that haunt your psyche, and don't allow you to become who you should be. Whether you're feeling senses of worthlessness, meaninglessness, insignificance, or fears, insecurities, and the other elements that plague us, that keep you paralyzed from making a move. So fill in the blanks. Everybody can fill in the blanks. Fill in every area in your life that is somewhat of an overwhelming experience that does not allow you to make a move, to make a decision, to make a commitment. These are all floods that attack us. So the theme of this chapter is not just about a physical flood that happened thousands of years ago. It's really about the flood of every life, every aspect of life. Sometimes in Hasidic thought, floods are a metaphor for daigas haparnasa, the worries about financial worries that we have and anxieties, to make ends meet, how we pay our bills. But of course it broadens into many other fears of issues around health, around family, around our own personal and personal relationships. Every one of us has our own set of challenges. And these are the floods that can potentially capsize us, potentially overwhelm us, and swamp us. So when the Torah talks about a flood, it's really talking about all types of floods. And what is the solution? What is the solution? The Torah says very clearly, build an ark. And we'll discuss both a physical ark and a spiritual ark. But there's an interesting choice of word here in the chapter. Aseh lecha teva. God tells Noah, build an ark. But the word ark in Hebrew, there are different words for a ship or a boat. There's aniyah, there's sfina, and then there's teva. Teva is actually one of the rarer words that you use. So why did the Torah choose this word? So the Baal Shem Tov shares a very short but powerful insight. The word teva, if you know Hebrew, also has another meaning. It means a word. Os, oisius are letters. Letters make up a word. So teva is a word. So essentially you could say, God said, build me a word. Build a word. What word are we talking about? What words are we talking about? So he says, the Baal Shem Tov, holy words of Torah and tefillah. The holy words of Torah and prayer. That they have the power to insulate us and protect us from the floodwaters of life. And not only to protect us, when you're in a boat, when you're in a teva, in an ark, not only are you protected, you actually ride on those waves. They lift you up. So instead of them overwhelming you and swamping and destroying, they become a force of elevation. So Baal Shem Tov says each of us has to build these oases, these points of refuge that protect us from the floodwaters of our lives. And as I said, floodwaters, you just replace that with anything that is bothering you in your life. Anything significant that is a source of anxiety, worry, concern. And we all have something. That I can guarantee. Without even, that's not Ruach HaKodesh. It's not a type of prophecy. The human condition is synonymous with challenges. Because indeed, that's the way God created the world. He sent us into a world with floodwaters. But He gave us the resources and the tools and the formulas of how to deal with it. So the story of Noah is actually the story of our own lives as we deal with the forces, the floodwaters that come due to the corruption of the universe, and how we build the right arcs to be able to survive, maintain, and actually thrive through the process. So let's elaborate a bit more about that. Well, everybody should always be blessed with only good, easy life without challenges. But as we know, that's not always so realistic. I would say that relatively speaking in history, we are living in most blessed times, even though we have the challenges that exist today. But you can't compare it to 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago. You know, we're sitting here, we can exercise our right to practice Judaism, to study, to pray, to do anything you wish, to send your children to any school you like. So it's not the case for most of our history. Besides the persecutions, not only the Holocaust, pre to the Holocaust were the pogroms, and pre the pogroms was Inquisitions, and the Inquisitions, and then there was the Crusaders, and again and again, we also lived under the control and we were subjugated to the whims of a population that not necessarily found Jews acceptable. And they absolutely, it was the threat, if you study Torah, the threat of death. Send your children to schools. I could speak personally, not myself personally, my parents who grew up both in the former Soviet Union. So my father, my mother, they did not just able to go to a Jewish school. This is under Stalin's Russia, Soviet Union, and it was forbidden. They had to go to public schools. It was just not easy to keep Shabbos. The whole thing was a challenge. Any way you exercised, you demonstrated your Judaism, you were going to be discriminated against. And this really didn't change much till essentially in the last 20 years, 1990, when Glasnost, the perestroika and all that came with Gorbachev. Today there's a renaissance of Jewish life in Russia. And the same was in many other parts of the world, in all parts of the world, if you go back 300 years ago. So we have to remember the blessings we have. And yet we also have our challenges. The challenges, frankly, mostly today, besides, of course, in the Middle East where we have a real threat. But remember, we also have a way to protect ourselves. We're not under the rule of anti-Semites. everything going on in Israel, we have the power to deal with. And frankly, between us, even though it's online, I can't say it's between us, if we did what we had to do, we wouldn't have most of these problems. When a winner of wars behaves like a loser and lets the loser feel that they're a winner, what do you think will happen? I was only a little child during the 6-day war. I was 10 years old. I remember it, but I don't remember it as an adult. There were a lot of sad mistakes that were made after that war, when God blessed Israel with the ability to win the war in just 6 days with minimal casualties, tripling its size. Many, many mistakes were made. I'm not here now to criticize. As I said, we have to stand unified, but we have to also be aware of our strengths and not be apologetic. We have no one to apologize to. And if we were strong in our attitudes, there'd be a lot of different situations going on. But the point I want to make is that we are not living under the control of others. We have the ability to control our destiny anywhere in the world. So the challenge today is a very different type of flood. The flood today is actually the opposite. What do you do with freedom? What do you do with success? Some people will tell you that failure is a lot easier to deal with than success. Failure is a failure. It's a very obvious failure. And then you build and try to build success. But when you're successful, you can also fail. You can fail in how to appreciate it. You can fail in being humble. You can fail in maintaining success. Far, far more complicated success than failure. Everyone should be successful, but don't think it doesn't come with its challenges. You know, the classic joke, I've repeated a number of times, where the guy gets up in the Knesset and says, I have the solution to our problems. Instead of fighting with the Arabs, let's attack the United States of America. They'll beat us, of course. And then, out of guilt, they'll rebuild us as they did Germany and Japan after World War II. So we'll get a lot more money than we get even now. An old Jew gets up in the back of the room and says, very nice idea, but one small problem. What happens if we win? It's a very good plan if you lose, but what happens if you win? Which, of course, captures one of the biggest issues in life. It's one thing to have a vision where you say, like when Israel became a state. So in some ways, many Jews united around one thing, a homeland. They may have disagreed theologically, may have disagreed with many things, but a homeland, people understood, a haven, especially after the Holocaust. But once you have the homeland, and you ask someone, so what's the vision for Israel for the next 10 years, 50 years? We have the homeland. Now it's the largest single place of Jewish population in the world. What's the vision? Is the vision only to be anti-Semites? That's not my words. I've heard this from young people say to me, I have enough of my life being an anti-Semite. All the organizations, we're fighting anti-Semitism. What do we stand for? Not just what we're against. Obviously, we don't want to be killed, and we're against anyone discriminating, and racism and anti-Semitism. But what do we stand for? And if you can't answer that question to children and to adults, it's tragedy. And unfortunately, that question remains lingering. Many, many Jews have no idea what we stand for. And as a result, what happens is we have a new flood, the flood of ignorance, of assimilation, the flood of apathy, which in many ways is far more destructive than a visible enemy. The guy asked his friend, what's worse, apathy or ignorance? And he said, I don't know, and I don't care. It's the kiss of death. Indifference. Indifference. You'd rather have an enemy that at least disagrees with you passionately than someone that just yawns and falls asleep on you. Because there's no one there. There's no one to talk to. There's no hope. And there's a lot of apathy. So all these are different floods that affect our modern age. And the question is, how do we protect, how do we deal with that? So the answer to all of them, however you filled in those blanks about your particular flood in your life that overwhelms you. And overwhelmed doesn't necessarily mean dramatic fireworks, I'm overwhelmed. It could be subtle. It could be an addiction. It could be a habit. It could be a routine you get trapped in. Overwhelmed means that you're not in control. Something else is controlling you. All these are floods. That's what a flood means. You can't control the flow, it's controlling you. Some way it's overcoming you. So the answer to all of it is teva. You have to build words. Both in times of oppression when we suffered under the subjugation of other nations, and in our times we always need those arcs. Those are the solution to all challenges. So there are two types of challenges in general, as I mentioned. I'll just spell it out in the context of a verse. There's a verse in the book of Isaiah, I think, yeah. V'hoi yitaka b'shefer gadol, that talking about the future messianic times. V'hoi yitaka b'shefer gadol, and there will be a great blast, a great shofar, not shofar alone, shofar gadol, a great shofar, a great sounding of a shofar, the sounding of the great shofar. And what will it do? It will draw the Jews from all over the world and gather them back to Israel. It says, Nedochim be'eretz Mitzrayim, those that were, pushed away or pushed aside in Eretz Mitzrayim, in Egypt, or Mitzrayim in Hebrew, and Evdim be'eretz Asher. And those lost in the land of Asher, A-S-H-U-R, Asher, Aleph Shin Vav Resh. And what will happen? That they will all gather together, L'shtachavus al Har Kotshi, to come and bow at my holy mountain. So like every verse in the Torah, every word is precise. What is the difference between why here it says Nedachim, which means like Nitcha. Nitcha means to be pushed aside. Someone's like rejected, someone is excommunicated, is like pushed aside. And Evdim, which means you're lost. And why is one word used by Mitzrayim and the other by Eretz Asher? So the answer is, if you know Hebrew, the roots, the etymology of the words, Mitzrayim refers to constraints. It refers to limitations. Meitzar in Hebrew is a boundary. So every form of boundary, min ha-meitzar, any form of constraint, any form of distress, is Eretz Mitzrayim. Asher, the word Asher with an aleph, comes from the word Oisher. Not as in wealth, but Oisher as in pleasure. It's the exact opposite of Mitzrayim. It's opulence. It's abundance. Asher. So here's so there are two challenges that every person, both collectively and individual, can go through. Besides, of course, the details. One is the challenge of anius, of poverty, and one is the challenge of wealth. Which is a greater challenge? Now, of course, everyone would love to have the challenge of wealth, but there are two challenges. Growing up in poverty, and I don't just mean material, financial poverty, I mean in any type of impoverished way, has its challenges. You don't have what you need. You're worried where the next meal comes from. It's a very deep state of anxiety and distress. And then there's another challenge, the challenge of wealth, where you have everything you have that you need, and more than you need. And you learn, and you begin to take it for granted. You become spoiled. So the verse is saying that the challenge of Mitzrayim, you can be pushed away, you can be pushed aside, feel that you don't belong, but you're not lost necessarily. When it comes to Asher, you can be completely lost, because what the power of wealth and success does, it completely submerges you to the point that you lose yourself. So the first one, is definitely not pleasant, and it's definitely a challenge. But you don't necessarily lose your identity. You get diminished, you feel demoralized, you feel weak. So the first one refers to most of the Jewish history that we dealt with oppression. We lived in poverty in most cases. We dealt with oppression of all different sorts. And Asher is far more the challenges of our time, as I mentioned, success. And materially we have a lot of success. Jews are very influential. And there's a lot of wealth, and there's a lot of prosperity. Again, doesn't mean everyone. Obviously there are people who don't have that. But generally speaking, if you were to compare it, there are far more successful, materially successful Jews today than ever in history. And both in the context of finance and in context of influence and context of positions and education and so on and so forth. I mean, 40% I think of Nobel Prizes are Jews. Now what does that do? That can have the power of causing you to get lost, where you lose yourself in all the success. You start convincing yourself, I'm a self-made person. And that has far more damaging psychological effects than the first one. That's why it's called being lost. And yet comes a shofar, a voice, a cry, that wakes us up, all of us, no matter which state we're in, and tells us you can come to a deeper awareness. But how do you do that? So how do you do that? You do that through, as I said, through building an ark, building arks. So God sends us into this world. At times we may experience deprivation, that's Mitzrayim. At other times we experience overindulgence. And you'll often see people can fluctuate between those two poles. You know, deprivation is feeling like you don't have enough and you feel like you're completely minimized. And overindulgence, which means you feel you have too much, like starving from eating too much. I'm not starving, killing yourself from eating too much. And both are challenges. And whatever challenge that is the flood, and as I said, anything you fill the blanks in, the answer is always the ark. So let's analyze, what is this ark? So left to our own accord, let's use a case study type of thing. A child grows up in this world. And imagine, God forbid, they don't have anyone to protect them. They don't have parents, don't have educators, don't have adults, relatives. What will happen with a child left on its own from birth? No way that it could survive, because it's a hostile world, full of predators. There's the natural elements. Every newborn child needs protection. Indeed, that's why 9 months we're in our mother's womb, that's the ultimate protection. But even as we come out of the womb and we're born, we need protection. We need a home. We need a hearth. We need something that gives us security. And when a child doesn't have that, it creates tremendous problems. Why? Because the world is not a neutral place. It's not like, okay, it's a neutral place, so fine, you didn't grow, but you're not going to be hurt. Absolutely not. Which means all the paths are dangerous. Dangerous doesn't mean every path is dangerous. It means there's always potential danger lurking. It could be in the form of a human being, it could be a form of nature, it could be a form of the elements, it could be so many different forms. So it's critical that in this world we have to have something to insulate ourselves. I'm even just taking a very basic example. A child is born naked, but you can't live in this world naked. I'm not just talking about from a sexual point of view, I'm talking about simply for warmth. You need something to cover yourself with. That's, of course, physically. And psychologically, you need the nurturing that parents and a nurturing environment provides. So right there is already an ark is being built. Every child needs its ark. The ark could be its crib, it could be its the home, it could be the parents, it could be those that protect it. Why? Because the world on its own is a hostile place. To use the verse in the Torah right from the beginning, Bereshis bara Elokim, the beginning God created heaven and earth. And what is the next verse? Va'eretz, and the land was toyev avohu. It was chaotic and empty, void. V'choshech al pnei hasahim, and darkness was covered the face of the earth, of the existence. But then there's the redeeming silver lining. V'ruach Elokim merachefes al pnei hamayim, and the Spirit of God hovered over the water. It's a very cryptic verse. What does it mean? I'm not going to go into analyzing right now. I've discussed it in other classes. But one thing for sure you get from the message from that second verse, it's not pretty. It doesn't sound great. It sounds chaotic. It sounds empty and darkness. Yes, there's the Spirit of God hovering, but the essential state of being doesn't sound pleasant. Comes the next verse. Vayemer Elokim, what? Yehi ar. First 3 verses of the Torah tell you the whole story of life. World is created, but it's created in darkness, shrouded in darkness. And then God says, let there be light. Vayhi ar, and there was light. Again, here's not the place to analyze the redundancy, the seeming redundancy, but rest assured it's full of rich mystical meaning and psychological meaning. And what's relevant to our discussion is that the world is a dark place and you need to create light. God created it this way, and we too emulate that in our lives. Which means, on a very basic level, it would have been beautiful if we were born and we came out of our mother's womb with a little box that came from God that said, this is the mission of your life, and now figure out how to implement it. That would have been great. But that's not how it works. We come out of our mother's womb into a dark world where we don't know what the future holds. We don't even know what we're made of. We have to explore. We have to experiment, trial and error to figure out what we're good at. And this is even with the best parents and with the best education. And then when we go through life, again, what comes tomorrow, what curveball will be thrown our way, we also have no clue. The roads are all dark. But then comes Vayihi Ar. God gives us Torah Ar. The Torah is a beacon of light. Think of it like the headlights of a car in a dark road. What do you do without light? Now, interesting paradox of light is, light doesn't create anything. It doesn't do anything, actually. When you turn on a light in a dark room, nothing changes in the room. The only thing is, now you see what it illuminates what's in the room. Here are the chairs, here's the table. So without the light, you could bump into the table, you could, God forbid, fall down the steps, you could go the wrong path and end up who knows where. So the world is a dark place and you need light, like a road map, that tells you here's the right road to go on, this is the wrong road. Without light, you just travel in darkness. It's the first GPS you can put it, is Vayihi Ar. Torah Ar, Ner Mitzvah v'Torah Ar. The flame of a mitzvah and the light of Torah. These are not just coincidental expressions. It's very, very precise. Because in darkness you need light. The Torah gives you direction, guidance. That's what the word Torah actually means. The word Torah comes from the word Hira, directive, guidance. As a matter of fact, another interesting thing, anyone knows what the word in Aramaic for Torah is? Eiraisa. So the Zohar says, Eiraisa means Eir Yaisa. Yaisa means the bringing light. It brings light. So the word Torah itself really comes from the word light. And actually, if you think of Torah itself, Torah has the letters Vav Resh, similar to the words in light. So light is the key element that gives us direction. It doesn't change anything in reality, but without it you cannot know, is this a good thing or is it a bad thing? Because it's all dark. Someone will give you, here's healthy food, here's toxic. If you don't have a light, and light doesn't just mean see it physically, but also the wisdom, the light of Chacham Ein of Bereshe, the light of your mind, that says, you know what, this is healthy, this is destructive. So light is a clarifier and crystallizes things. So therefore it's obvious that light, therefore the light of Torah, are the tevas, the words, are the arcs that protect us from the darkness that covers the earth. And that darkness begins, we all begin in our lives ignorant. No one comes informed. You have to start from scratch. However, it's not completely from scratch. As I've mentioned a number of times, the Gemara, the Talmud says that the entire Torah is taught to a child in its mother's womb. And then upon birth, the Talmud says, comes a malach, an angel, Satra al Piv, like does shh, and makes him forget, Meshachri, he forgets the whole thing. That's why we have a cleft right over our upper lip. Since I have a mustache, it's harder to sew, but check it out, we all have a cleft. That's like the indentation of the angel. That's shh, and quieted and silenced the Torah that we were taught. The obvious big klotzka, big question. The Alter Rebbe asks in the Likutei Torah, the Parsha Shlach, he says, so what's the point of teaching someone the whole thing and making them forget? That's like cruel. You don't want them to know, don't teach them in the first place. Why would you teach someone an entire system and then say, and now you're going to forget it all? Besides, of course, the halachic prohibition of forgetting the Torah is not a simple matter. You're not supposed to forget the Torah, especially deliberately. And his answer is again simple but brilliant and profound. Only our conscious minds forget. There's a part of us that remembers in a more superconscious state. And just to give an example, besides the miracle of language, which scientists marvel how someone at age 2 or 3 can already master a language, meaning just to learn how to speak. So clearly we already have the potential. But there you can at least say you're emulating your parents, etc., etc. Even that still is not an adequate response. But what about music? We know that children respond to music even from day one, and more than that, there are studies that show in the womb of a mother, when music is played in the vicinity of a mother's womb, the fetus responds. There's evidence showing that the fetus moves toward the music, responds to the music. The question is, how does a fetus know about music? It's never heard music before, seemingly. Which really brings the bigger question why music resonates in the first place. What is it about the rhythm and the sound of music that touches us so? So science has not really figured it out, but I can tell you what the mystics say. Because the soul has heard all the music it has to hear. The language of the soul is the language of music, long before it comes to this earth. So it's simply resonating for the soul. The truths that music convey are already inside of us, even though we may not have conscious awareness of it. That's why when you hear it, something rings right, rings true, which is the word resonance. That's what resonance means. So the entire Torah is taught in our mother's womb, and then our conscious minds are made to forget. But we have embedded in our so-called core, our source code, embedded in our souls, is the knowledge that we learned, and now we have to rediscover it. And that's where Torah Or comes in. Building letters, words, arcs of the holy words of Torah and prayer is what creates the protection necessary to survive and thrive in a dark world that is filled with dark floodwaters that will overwhelm you. It's not a neutral world. And that's why I go back. A child left on its own with no one to protect it will be hurt. Guaranteed. There's no such thing. This world is not a neutral world. So we have to begin building arcs from the earliest of age. God builds the first ark, which is your mother's womb, that protects you from the floodwaters and allows in just enough what you need to be able to grow. And then we build arcs for our children as they grow into adults. I don't know if you know this, but one of the customs we do, what do? We surround newborn children with holy letters. You'll see often in a crib or by a bris, or whether it's a boy or girl, you'll see surrounded these little things that is like pages that are hung. Why? Because the letters of Torah and Tefillah are the arcs, as I said, the teva, and the Baal Shem Tov explains, that protect. And the more we surround our children, not just with love and sustenance as food, but also with spiritual fortification, which means teaching them the values, that we are here as sacred souls traveling through a mundane world. These are the tools that create the proper protection to be able to face any floodwater that will attack us. So then you ask yourself the question. I mean, Viktor Frankl somewhat tried to address it in his Man in Search of Meaning. He was in the camps during the Holocaust, and he observed, which in turn became the birth of logotherapy, a whole new way, psychology. He observed that those that had beliefs and had some connection to God, in some way were able to survive more than those that didn't. Not that they suffered less, but they were able to survive. And his answer is because they had the idea of meaning in life. Everything had a deeper purpose. Those that didn't have meaning were far easier to capitulate and surrender because they had nothing holding them up. This is the concept with the Hasidic, who is it, Shlomo from Primishlan, the expression that when you're tied above, you don't fall below. Famous story that he was traveling, I'm trying to remember, Primishlaner. What was the Primishlaner's first name? Mayor Primishlan, sorry. The mayor of Primishlan. So he was in this town and he was looking for a mikveh, which is a ritual bathhouse, and it was in the which he wanted to go to before Shabbos, as the custom by many Chassidim. But it was in the cold winter in Russia. So they told him there's a mikveh, but it's at the bottom of a mountain, at a hill. Nobody goes there in the winter because it's very treacherous, slippery slopes and so on, a lot of ice. But he insisted, and he went. He wasn't a young man. A few skeptics in town heard that he's going, and they wanted to see how is he going to make it. Well, they went to observe him. They themselves fell and broke a few bones. He went into the mikveh, came out of it unscathed. Later he was asked, how is it that you were able to make it when other younger people could not? So he said, when you're tied above, you don't fall below. It's simple. If you have a rope that you're holding on to, whether it's visible or invisible, it helps you balance. You know, deep sea diving, not the scuba sort, where you go down. If you have a pipe that goes up, it keeps you alive. You don't have a pipe, God forbid, you'll drown. The story with the Blozhner Rebbe comes to mind, where he was also in the camps with this Hasidim. And this camp, the commander there had a particular so-called game he liked to play. What was the game? He had the Jews dig wide trenches and then had them jump over. And those that jumped, were able to jump over, survived. The rest were shot. The game was about to begin, and one of the Hasidim says to the Rebbe, to the Blozhner Rebbe, he says, Rebbe, enough is enough of this humiliation, of this dehumanization. Let's just allow ourselves to die and return to God. And the Rebbe said, no, as long as we have the ability to live and survive, we have to do whatever it takes. And the so-called game began. They dug the trenches, people started jumping, and the mayhem and havoc, no one knew who survived, who didn't survive. The camps were liberated a little while later, and lo and behold, the Rebbe and the Chassid both survived, each surprised by the other's survival, and they meet. And the Chassid says to the Rebbe, tell me, you're not a young man, how did you jump over that trench? So he said, I closed my eyes, and I held on to the coattails, to the kapote of my father, my grandfather, my holy great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather. So it gave me the strength to jump. But how about you? You're also not so young, he asked the Chassid. So the Chassid said, I held on to your coattails. Now this is not just a nice story, this is the essence. We are midgets that stand on the shoulders of giants. And then we are invincible, as I mentioned before about unity. Because we're all mortals, we all have our strengths and weaknesses. But when you come with the strength of multitudes, of generations, of the greatest, you have far different power. That's why betach, trust, is such a powerful force in life. And it's precisely when things are not going well. Because betach connects you to that rope, to those coattails, that allows you to deal with any challenge. I always share the story because it's just so powerful. When the previous Chabad Lubavitch Rebbe, Friedrich Rebbe, was in prison in 1927, they arrested him. And among many different things he describes as what he calls Masechta Gehenim, the discourse from hell that he went through, the torture. And one of them pointed, one of the Jewish communists, who were worse than all of the rest, pointed a gun to his head and said, Rebbe, and the Rebbe had refused to cooperate. For his own dignity and survival, he decided he's not cooperating. Didn't want to in any way succumb or surrender to them. So one of them pointed the gun to his head and said, Rebbe, in Yiddish, he said, this gun here has changed many a mind. And the Rebbe, without flinching, responded, this toy, this tzatzka, can frighten someone that has one world and many gods, but not someone that has one God and many worlds, or two worlds. It's the same answer. And it wasn't just words. You can find, when you think all there is in life is one, all your eggs are in one basket called this material world, yeah. If you don't have it, it's all over. But when you know there are dimensions to existence, and the soul continues its journey, and we've been here for thousands of years, a person like that who really knows that is connected to something beyond that can be killed. You can take my body, you can't take my soul. You can take my life, you can't take my beliefs. And if it won't be me, it'll be my children. That's what the Rebbe was saying. One God, many worlds. You have one world and many gods, every day another God. Obviously, you'll be frightened. Now, we're not on that level necessarily. We do have frights, and we have fears and insecurities, but this is something we have to aspire to. And we have the ability to reach that. That requires connecting. That's why the ark that's why you cannot just swim through floodwaters. You need an ark. There's no way you could do it alone. The ark are those coattails. That's the light in the darkness. That's the ark that protects us. Aselech HaTeva. And interesting, then it continues, it says, Tzoyer Tasel HaTeva. Don't just build an ark, build Tzohar. And Rashi says, the commentaries explain Tzohar, what does Tzohar mean? One opinion is a window. Another opinion is a illuminating stone. Light, there you go, Tzohar, again, light. Tzohar. An illuminated ark, not just an ark, an illuminated one that guides us like a beacon of light through the dark roads. So we have our antidote, we have our formula. This doesn't mean, and not justifying, not God forbid, we have to do whatever it takes not to have to deal with challenges, but this is what gives us strength in the darkest of times. And also strength in the best of times. As I mentioned, Ashur, not just Mitzrayim, but when things are going well. The ability to connect, the ability to bind ourselves to something that's greater than us. Now I know it sounds so simple. You say, if that's the case, why don't we all just do it? Why we don't all just do it? Because our subjectivity blinds us. You know, I mentioned before that it's all captured in the first 3 verses in the Torah. God created heaven and earth. The world is dark, chaotic. And then comes the verse 3, Vayhi ar, let there be light. Torah ar, ner mitzvah Torah. Because we live in a dark world, it's not a neutral world, and we need the light. It's all captured right there. But here's the problem. What happens if you don't think it's dark? What happens if you convince yourself that life is not so dark? So then we have what the Baal Shem Tov calls Haster Aster Ponai. The question is, Anochi Haster Aster Ponai, a double Haster. What is that double? What means I conceal myself? It should have said, Anochi Haster, I conceal myself. And he explains there's 2 types of concealment. One concealment that you know it's dark. And what about when the concealment conceals the concealment? That's what psychology calls denial. You don't know it's dark, which is far for some cheshech la'er. You convince yourself light is dark and dark is light. Mar l'mosuk, you convince yourself that what is bitter is sweet. It's distortion. That's why it's so difficult. If we knew it was really dark and we understood it and we saw it clearly, that would at least compel us to look for light. But if you convince yourself that things are all right, or you minimize the problems, clearly you're not going to go for help. So if there's the floodwaters are raging out there, and you convince yourself it's not so flooding, which is what people do. You know, talking psychologically, I'm sure you're aware of this, and I hope none of you experience it, but I'm sure you've heard of this. People who grow up in very difficult situations, I'm using extreme example just to make the point, in extremely abusive situations, at some point become accustomed to the extent they think that's normal. And they have no clue there's another way of looking at things. And that's what they expect. And when someone enlightens them at some point in life that's not normal, they do not accept it easily. That's what happens. If you live in a toxic environment long enough, you begin to think the toxins are healthy. And if someone brings fresh air, you say that's not healthy, because it's not your comfort zone. This is sadly what happens when children, especially who are in their formative years, impressionable, are exposed to negative stuff. In the beginning they protest, like any healthy person does. And then as it continues to be repeated, slowly, not only do they stop protesting, they stop accepting that as reality. And then they first second guess themselves, and then at some point a new reality, a new script has been written. And it takes years of therapy to reverse and teach them that the new script that you developed is not accurate, it's false. So the Haster Aster Pana is far worse when the concealment is concealed. Or you convince yourself it's not so bad. I mean, look how often do we not solve problems because we minimize. We'll say, yeah, there's a problem, but it's not so bad. I can handle it. I can stop whenever I want, or some other stuff like that. And Tanya, he puts it beautifully when he says, under the circumstances, he says that every sin, every time you, anavera, which comes from the word havara, mereshus l'reshus, it's a type of displacement, golus, a displacement. Spiritual dissonance, psychological dissonance, cognitive dissonance, emotional dissonance. But what happens when you convince yourself, Eidenu b'yaduse, you convince yourself, nothing really happened. I didn't really sever my connection to my life source. That's the problem. That's why the Talmud says, Ein Adam Ever Avera, a person will not experience displacement except under one condition. They experience a moment of insanity. Why? Why can't you just say, a person has a taiva, he has a desire, a temptation that seduces him or her, and that's why he sinned. He knows it's wrong, But he was overpowered by a temptation. Why does the Talmud have to say? And it says, "Ein adam over elo." If you know the laws in the poskim, the klali hashas, when it says "ein elo," means it's not just that it's not possible. It means it's never that way. It's likuva. It means it's not possible at all. There's no such thing. It's not possible that a person would sin, or in this case transgress, unless there was a moment of shtus. Shtus can be defined insanity, blindness, however you interpret. Why? Why can't you say I'm seeing clearly, and I'm still doing it because I'm tempted to do it? There people know very well they're doing something wrong, because it requires that you minimize the consequences for you to really do it. Would any healthy, normal person put their hand in fire? No. Why? Because you know fire is damaging, you'll never put your hand in fire. I'm talking about a normal person. Even a behemoth, even an animal, is called a behemoth sheit, is called an insane animal if it jumps into fire. In the laws of shemer chinam, shemer sachar, the laws of protection, if you give somebody your property or your animal or something of your belongings to protect, to watch over, a guardian. So there are 4 different types, but it's not relevant to our discussion. What happens if you give a shemer chinam, or you give someone an animal to watch over? So since you take the obligation to watch over it, obviously you're responsible if the animal causes damage, or if the animal gets damaged. For example, if the animal, you're walking with the animal and the animal falls into a pit, you're responsible. You should have seen the pit and not let the animal fall there. However, what happens if the animal jumped into a fire and got hurt or died? So the poskim, the ruling on that is, you're exonerated. You're not responsible. Why? Because no normal animal jumps into fire, and you were never told this was an insane animal. So therefore, you're not responsible. Same with human beings. So how is it possible that a person can do something to hurt themselves? They either minimize that there's hurt, or they decide that what they're doing is not a problem. That's what he says there in Tanya. So the problem, Haster Aster Panai, is the real compelling operative issue. We don't think there's darkness. So if you're darkness, why would you need to have Torah or and direction in life and guidance? Why would you need an ark if you don't think there's a flood? It's rain. It's heavy rain, fine. It took 120 years for Noah to build the ark because God wanted the people to see him building and keep asking why he's building, to remind them. And they decided, they kept seeing, they said, what are you talking about? The guy is delusional. He thinks some type of flood is coming. And even when they saw the drops falling, they said it's not so bad. That's the challenge. We convince ourselves that this world is a very illuminated world, when in truth it's dark. And therefore, we minimize the consequences of our actions. And that's why it requires a moment of insanity for us to really be to experience dissonance. Because clarity could never allow for dissonance to take place. Every addiction, every mistake we make, and I'm not talking about inadvertent, I'm talking about is a result of minimizing the consequences. No way that a person would go and jump into fire if they knew that it was actually fire. So, going back to the point, so the Baal Shem Tov's advice, like taken from the verse, Vayhi Ar, Teva, Aselecha Teva, and Soyer Tasela Teva. Teva meaning the word. Teva comes from is the same word, Tevis, words. The holy words of Torah and Tefillah, the holy words of Torah and prayer, is the oasis, the insulation we create that allows us to navigate through the floodwaters of life. And just to show you how difficult it is, there are many people who study a lot of Torah, and they're very committed. And yet, when it comes to business, they get overwhelmed. It totally submerges us. Like Mayim Rabim refers to the great floodwaters, refers to the immersion in business, to the point where, as one of the Rebbe Rashab once told one of his students, who was a great student, but then later became a galoshes manufacturer, and those days he made a lot of money because the streets were unpaved in the good old Russia. So galoshes saved many a shoe. As his business grew, you can imagine, it required more of his investment in it. So of course he started compromising his studying and his praying and so on, to the point that he was completely submerged in his business. And what did the Rebbe Rashab say to him when he met him? He gave one look at him and said, Ich hab gesehen a Fiss in Galoshen, aber a Kopf in Galoshen, aber kein Mensch gesehen. I've seen feet in galoshes, but I've never seen a head in galoshes. That's called being completely submerged and swamped by the floodwaters of life. There's an expression that when a person does this business, it should be belay lev v'lev, without a heart and with a heart. What does that mean? It means yigiyas kapecha. It should be kapecha. Your hands should exert themselves, but your mind has to always be reserved for something greater, or else you become a product of your actions. That's what happens. As much as you may think you're idealistic and you're removed, we become products of the things we become committed to. So, Belay Lev means that, of course, Masa Matan Bamuni, you have to do business ethically, faithfully, but you have to always remember that's not your identity. Your self-worth is not defined by your net worth. And as one of the Chassidim once was making his calculations, he was a businessman, and Benjamin Kletzker was his name, and he was calculating. He wrote January or Tishrei, profit and loss, income, expenses. January or Cheshvan, Kislev, the English month, February, March, and so on. And then when it came to the bottom line, there's a total. Is it a plus or a minus? So he wrote neither. He wrote Ein Eid Milvade. There's nothing but God. There's nothing but you, but Him. Because when it came to the total of everything, it's not the money. God is the only thing that really matters. So the obvious question that's asked is, if he was so God-centered, then how did he have the presence of mind to write calculations on each of the months? He should have written Tishrei or January, God equals God. February equals God. March equals God. And the answer, of course, is because if that was the case, he shouldn't be in business. He's a batlin. He should not be in business because he doesn't know how to run a business. He understood that while you're in business, you have to do what the business is, but never think that the business defines you. It's what you do. It's part of it's a means to an end. The end, you want the real end, what does it all add up to? A higher presence. Now that's the hardest. It's easier to live in Kolel and live in an oasis all the time, in an ark, and not to deal with the floods of waters of life. That way you're separate from it all. The real chiddush, the real innovation is to be within but remain above. Your feet are firmly planted on the ground, but your head is always in the clouds. That's why after the flood, Noah is told by God, now tseimin ateva. Why he doesn't want to leave. Once he got that comfort zone, he found a way to protect himself from the flood. Why risk it? Why suddenly go out into a world? He didn't want to have children. He didn't want a world that could become corrupt again. And that's why God has to repeat the mitzvah of Pruruvu, to build a family, and to go out and settle the world, l'shavas, to build the world. Why? Because there's a time where you need the protection, and there's a time where you have to leave and go out to the world, not, God forbid, unarmed. You're armed with the teva, satera, tefillah, with the teva that surrounds you, so now you have the power to go immerse yourself in a potentially corrupt and dark world and build arcs in that world without escaping from it. So it's a dance, a constant dance. That's why Noach is always read right after the month of Tishrei, right after we read about the creation of the world anew, obviously following the holidays. Simchas Torah is when we read it, Bereshis, because the first step after a new world is created. Fine, we were in the oasis and protected by the wings and cushioned and buffered by Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Simchas Torah. But now you have to enter a world where there's a dark world, a corrupt world. And now you have to build arcs in that world. So Noah comes perfect timing. As you enter that type of world, don't be overwhelmed. Don't run back and escape. This is the world you have to be into. Build arcs. Build an ark. So however you define floods, as I mentioned before, fill in the blanks, the ark is the formula. And it's always been the formula. This is how Jews survived. Viktor Frankl called it man in search of meaning. We call it Tevis Teir V'Tfilah. It's the same idea. It means there's something greater than us that helps hold us up in the difficult times. That's what betachon and trust is. As I said, you're tied above, you don't fall below. Holding on to the coattails of those that came before us. That's what true betachon is. And it's the only way you can counter the real fears and challenges of this world, even the darkest ones. I remember I'm trying to remember how long ago it was. What are we now, 2015? When was the first intifada? The first bombings? 87? So it'll be around 20 years ago? Oh no, almost 30 years ago. It wasn't the first one. It was the first time I remember. I think it was around 15, maybe 20 years ago. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So I remember it was the first time they started blowing, God forbid, with these attacks in cafes in Jerusalem. I remember, so there was one very big one that was like a very, everyone was shaken up by it. In Cafe Ramon, I think, in Ben Yehuda in Jerusalem, Friday afternoon. So there was terrorist left a bomb, which exploded, and quite a few casualties, deaths and casualties. And so I remember a little while after that, maybe half a year later, this class here, and that was where were we at the time? We were on 81st Street, the Upper West Side, Boyaner, Kloy Stiebel. So a woman, at the end of the class, she was sitting in the back with a friend. You know, she had a striking look, I remember, and she came over to me after the class, and she came closer, and I saw that her face, which was beautiful, but I saw it was restructured. I have no other way to say it. And she said to me the following, I'll never forget, she said, she was one of the people, she went to see a friend, they were having coffee at the cafe, and it blew up not far from where she was. So she survived, but she said barely. It blew off her face, literally. She lost her hearing, her smell and taste. And she was lying in a hospital in agony for months and months and months. Now, this is the interesting part. She said that her parents did not know she was in Israel because she went to study Torah. She got interested and she joined some program and she decided to go study in one of the schools. Her parents would never let her do that, so she told them that she's going somewhere for a trip, somewhere in the Middle East or Europe, I'm not sure what she said. Where did they discover that she was in Israel? On CNN, they saw her covered in blood. So of course they came flying. So that's how they knew I was here. And I literally, lying in those hospital bed, I lost everything, my face, my dignity, my health, everything. I prayed to God that He should take my life. Why would He do such a thing to me? I came to Israel as an American girl to study Torah, and look what happened. And she said, so besides the physical agony, just her whole state of mind was completely devastated. And then she said one morning, maybe 6 months later, they were ready, they were doing things, plastic surgery, and it wasn't just the face, it was also the skin, all the burns and stuff like that. She said, one morning I wake up, the sun was shining out through the window, and for some reason I had a surge of hope. I'm going to make it, and I'm going to make it through, and I'm going to fight, and I want to stay alive, and I want to rebuild my life. She said, I don't know where it came from, but that's what I had. And these were the words, the final words she said to me, which I remember till this day. She said, betachon, trust. You don't know how powerful it is until you have nothing but that. And I had nothing but that. Because everything else was taken. And the betachon is what gave me that strength again. Now, this wasn't just, I'm not just telling you a story, it's a story with a real person. It's easy for us to pontificate, but someone going through that has a certain credibility. Now again, none of us should ever know and have to come to that point where you have nothing but trust. But it just shows you the power of it, even when things are going well. As I mentioned before, Eretz Mitzrayim, Nedachim Beretz Mitzrayim, Oivdim Beretz Asher. Challenges and floods are not only a monopoly of the impoverished. You could be a very successful person and be completely flooded by your life and convinced that everything is great. So we all need humility. As a matter of fact, Oivdim, as I said before, Eretz Asher, Asher from the word opulence and prosperity, Oivdim, you can get completely lost there. You lose your whole identity in success. In failure, you don't lose your identity. You're broken and demoralized, but you don't lose your identity. You lose your identity when you're successful sometimes, if you don't have the grounding and something to hold you up. So the idea here is that nothing can overcome us when you're connected to above. And that's what gave strength to the Jewish people in the harshest of times. And in our times where we have a lot of success, is the thing we even needed even more. Because today you can convince yourself, hey, my life is working out, I'm making money, no one's oppressing me. But of course it also applies to our brothers and sisters in Israel now, going through their challenges. We're all one, we're all in it together. But this is the ultimate meaning of building an ark. No person can, no one can overcome challenges alone. You build an ark, you bring light. That's what insulates and buffers and gives us the ability not just to survive, but to thrive. Because once you have an ark, as I said before, the same floodwaters that would sink you and swamp you suddenly become a force that lifts you, because the teva is lifted on the waters. So the material world and all its tentacles and powers become they carry you if you have that buffer and that insulation, which means that you tied yourself to something that's greater than you are, which is those holy letters of Torah and Tefillah, the holy words, and that's what protects you from the forces out there, all of them. And this isn't just words. People went to yeshiva, they studied Torah. I'm talking about adaita de nafshe, studying it and connecting to it as a true life force, connecting it to as a true rope that holds you up, that you can turn to when things are not going so well and say, here's something I can grab onto and hold on to. So we have a formula in this week's chapter. It tells you how to deal with any flood that comes your way. You must surround yourself with those Torah and Tefillah. And of course, it's always best to do so before the flood begins. Noah could not have built an ark once the flood began. It doesn't work that way. Once the storm hits, you have to build it beforehand. So we're given this arsenal. In our mother's womb, we're given the first ark. The womb itself is an ark. And you're taught the entire Torah in this ark. Then you come out in the world, and the first thing, the custom, as I mentioned before, children are surrounded. Again, you'll see in the cribs, young newborn children, the custom is to put up shir hamalos and different holy words and letters. Even though the child can't read yet, but you want to surround them with forces that are greater, immortal, eternal forces that are more powerful than the temporary and transient forces of a material world. Because if not, we'll be swept away by this world. The only way to be not swept away is to have something that's stronger. I mean, that's a simple rule. So why is it so difficult? As I said, so that's so simple formula, is because we convince ourselves that it's not dark. We feel we don't need to have a boat or a teva. Things are not bad, Like I love when people tell me, how are you? I know that life is very difficult for them. They say, thank God. Could be worse, Or could be better, whatever. But listen, everyone should be blessed. Everyone should always be mevarchin Hashem ala teva kamay ala klola kamay, like just like you bless God for blessings, you also bless God for the negative. But that's not denial. You know it's negative and you still thank God. But denial means you convince yourself, not so bad. Guy's bleeding to death, psychologically, emotionally, it's not so bad. That's one of the ways we survive. It's a survival tool, some way to tolerate or keep sanity. So I'm not telling people, forcing them not to go into the denial. Haster aster panai. Once you convince yourself there's no real problem, very, very difficult to wake someone up. Someone knows there's an awareness. That's why whenever anyone speaks to me, I always tell them, the mere fact that you're speaking to me, you're already in good shape. I don't mean the me part, because the fact is you're speaking means that you think there's an issue. The problem is those that don't think there's one. So that's the blindness. So they never underestimate the power of what we call the tzimtzum harishan, the big black hole. In language of the pasuk, ha'aretz haisa toyu v'voyu. Remember, the Torah is eternal. So many people think, okay, after Vayhi that God said, let there be light, so the verse number 2 is no longer relevant. So then why do we read it? Every year. And every time we look at the Torah, why do we still have verse number 2? Once you have verse number 3, verse 2 is over with. You know, like the story they told the yeshiva kid. Says they say when you see Joseph goes to his brothers, and then they kidnap him and they're about to kill him and sell him into slavery. So they're reading the parsha. So the child cries out, you know, we read last year that you were captured already. Why are you going again? Why is Joseph going again? So when we read the Torah, even though it happened once, it's re-happening every time again. So verse number 2 is very relevant because the world still has a dimension of chaos and void, emptiness, however you translate it. There's darkness. Just look around, as I said before. What would we be like if we didn't have the protection of parents and education? Would we figure it out on our own? No, the world is all the paths are dangerous, and it's a dark world. We wouldn't know what road to travel on and what road to avoid if no one trained you. Instinct is not enough. So all you need to look at the world around us, and you know verse number 2 is very alive and kicking. And yet we still have verse number 3. Vayhi soyer tasla teva. You bring illuminate. And like the Zohar says, just like God created the world by looking to the Torah, that's why it says vayhi. Like an architect looks into a blueprint, so too kach b'nei Yisrael, so too barnash, so too human beings look in the Torah and kayim alma, and they preserve the world. So we emulate God, and we take the darkness of our lives and we bring light into it. But there's no way you can survive without the light. That's the ark that we build, the arcs that we build. So we have a proven formula that goes back thousands of years. Those that did it survived. Not just survived, they thrived. That's why we're here today. Today's challenges are far more complicated because of the haster, comfort zones, prosperity. When things are going well, so to speak, at least externally, you can easily convince yourself, I don't need anything else. You'll see, when was assimilation born, Jewish assimilation? Not when Jews were oppressed. When Jews were oppressed, you'd think they should have been angry at God and all forsake the Torah. That wasn't the case. The more they were oppressed, the stronger Jews were. You know when assimilation began? As soon as Jews stopped being oppressed, suddenly the emancipation began, the freedoms, all blessings. But as I said, success is a lot harder than failure. To win, to be successful, takes a lot more strength than to not. When Jews were oppressed, what else did they have? The only thing they had was their God and their trust and their faith. But now there's success. You know something? Maybe we don't really need these higher values. Who says we need a soul? Today science explains everything. Like the scientist that says to God, you know, I can do anything you can do. So God says, show me. So he takes a pile of earth. He's going to show God how from the earth he's going to create vegetation. So God says to him, use your own earth. It's very nice to use God's earth, and he's going to emulate what God is doing. You know, yes, we can emulate, we can do great things with science. But it's easy when you're successful, the challenge, and the Sma calls this a mitzvah sesa daraisa, to say, keichi ve'etzim yodi, to say, I am a self-made person. I did it all with my own power. That challenge only is a challenge of success. Failure never says that. Nobody likes to say, I'm the source of my failure. Success, who else but me? The self-made man. the other good Jewish woman, Ayn Rand, fountainhead, right? Self-made individual. That challenge is a lot harder because you convince yourself that things are working. And once you think things are working, you don't need light. Who needs a Torah light? When I have direction, I have money, I have science, I have knowledge. So the challenges today are very different, but in many ways deeper. They're within. But everyone needs the teva, because the floodwaters are very powerful. By the time we're age 20, I don't know if you know this statistic, in the Western world, by the time you're age 20, you have seen 1 million advertisements. You hear that? 1 million. Where did I get this number from? I was in Lima, Peru, a number of years ago. There was a conference on happiness. So there's a professor there who presented a psychological, secular take on happiness, and I did the Torah, mystical, spiritual take. And he mentioned it. 1 million advertisements. Now you think, wait, what's 1 million? Yeah. We're talking about everything. You walk down the street, television, internet, billboards, on and on and on. Now, you could say, I'm immune, it doesn't affect me. So what? I used to think that way when I was younger. I thought, these ads don't affect me. I don't buy these products. Then you get older, you realize it affects you so much, you don't even know it's affecting you. Subliminal. They're not spending millions of dollars, trust me, on advertising if it doesn't affect somebody. Coca-Cola experimented a number of years ago to stop advertising in certain markets just for 1 week, and sales dropped. It's Coca-Cola. You're already addicted to it. But the awareness, you got to keep people in their head. Coca-Cola from the youngest of age. Advertising is very subliminal, psychological manipulation, emotional manipulation. I'm not saying it doesn't have any value at all, but don't think that it's not playing with your head and your heart all the time. We're all affected by it. Doesn't matter whether you buy the product or not. You're affected. So this professor, and just to mention one additional thing, he said something interesting. Studies show that the country with the highest rate of optimism and people feeling positive about themselves is Holland, for some reason. Holland is the highest rate proportionally of people who are not depressed. The United States, I think, is one of the lowest, the highest depression, that is. And there are different studies, different theories rather. Some say because in Holland everyone has free health insurance. So I guess that lowers the anxiety level. Others say there's other reasons. He came up with a theory. He went to visit there. There are no billboards in Holland. There's no public advertising. I don't know if it's the law, whatever it is. There's no public advertising. So that's when he came up with the statistics. Since people are not seeing all the time in their face this product and that product, which of course makes you feel you can't buy it all, inadequate. Look at all these things that make me look better, travel here, I can't buy it, so it creates a less of a type of inadequacy and therefore a higher rate of contentment. That was his theory. But it doesn't matter, it's an interesting theory. So the point I'm making here is that how do you deal with this deluge? This is a deluge. Any of you know how to text in this room? You know what texting is? How much does text control your life, may I ask? Do you ever think about it? Or you think you control it? Try not doing it for 3 minutes and tell me. It's created this so-called emancipation, the freedom of technology. That you can access any information, anytime, anywhere, which sounds freeing. But in turn, it turns us into slaves to this technology. Now, I'm not dismissing its benefits. Don't get me wrong. That's not what I'm trying to say. But I think you all understand. Sitting at a meeting, everybody's texting. You start wondering, when's the last time you had an eye-to-eye conversation with somebody? I mean, parents and children texting each other. What about some a little emotional bonding? Shabbos, okay, yeah. But then people agonize. They can't wait till Shabbos is over to check their texts. And then I can tell you personally, husbands and wives, they come home after a busy day, you already think you're going to the bedroom and just to have a conversation, forget about intimacy. And everybody's with their texts. A woman tells me her husband is sleeping with someone else. His iPhone. It's also a form of an affair.
It's not, I understand, it's not exactly the affair with another woman, but it's an affair, it's competition, and you're busy with it, and you don't even realize. Because it sounds like, what's the big thing? I'm just checking my text and stuff like that. I mean, one theory you can say is, it's an excellent way to avoid life, because you always have something to run to. The next stimulation, the next piece of news, who's texting me, and so on and so forth. Again, I'm not suggesting there aren't benefits, but the question is, addiction simply means who's the master and who's the slave. That's the question here. Who's the tool? If your hammer is controlling your hand, there's a problem. The hand is supposed to control the hammer. And my point is not fire, brimstone against technology. I use it myself. And sometimes I look at myself and I laugh, exactly what I'm criticizing I do myself. But don't think we're not enslaved to a flood. This information revolution is exactly that, it's a flood. It has great benefits, but it's a flood. And it's not my words, actually, Mola Eretz Chamos. The world is filled with corruption or crime. Then there's the counter antidote to that is Yeshaya's words, Mola Eretz Deis Hashem Kamayim Le'yam Mechasim. A world filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. She'll say, okay, 1 second, which flood is worse? But the key thing with this, in Isaiah's words, is the knowledge of God. And that knowledge brings there should be no destruction. We're living in an information revolution. It's the exact opposite of the world that it was before, let's say, 40 years ago, 30 years ago. 30 years ago, to get a piece of information was a big thing, a scoop, trade secret. Today's the exact opposite. There's so much information, you don't know what's valuable, what's not. Because the good is Zalil, Yakar Mazel. You don't know what is important, what isn't important. I remember William Safire, Olav Hashem was a writer, a great writer for the New York Times. He wrote something very interesting just when the internet began. He was talking about the information revolution, and he said, what's going to be the role of journalists? And a very interesting way to put it. He says, journalists till that point, their role was to dig up a piece of information that no one knows. Like, let's say a crime happened, or an event in some country, or some whatever, economic event. So they come up with an angle, an interview, something that no one knows about. He said, now it's going to become exact opposite. All the information will be available to everybody, but no one knows which is relevant, which isn't relevant. He said, we'll become what he called information police. Like to be able to sift through, which is what Google is so brilliant at, that so many of our searches come back with results we want. It's able to sift through so much and get what you need. So it's like exact opposite. It's taking a flood of information and trying to extract what's relevant. The opposite of once it was. Once it was a drought and a piece of information was so valuable. Today it's the other way around. So make no mistake, we're living in a flood. And the flood, as I mentioned earlier, is not just advertising and internet and television and your mobile and everything that's going to be coming. Even more, remember, whatever we have now is just the infancy. Imagine when it really explodes. And there's the flood that I mentioned before, the flood of terror, of course, in Israel, the flood of our own insecurities and fears, and all the blanks that we fill in, whatever it is that you're dealing with, your anxieties. There's one antidote to it all. One solution for everything. The tevas, hatera v'atfila. You don't have an ark, you're dead in the water, no pun intended. I don't mean dead physically, sometimes physically too, but definitely psychologically and emotionally. Because what you have nothing to, there's no raft, there's nothing to hold on to. You're just swept away by whatever's coming our way. So it's a brilliant piece of advice and a brilliant command. God says, "Aseh lecha teva," build yourself a teva. Right now, build yourself an ark. As I said, the problem is we don't think that we're drowning. We don't think there's a threat. We minimize it. And our comfort zone, it's fine as it is. So my friends, maybe the point of this chapter is to wake us all up. Events in Israel definitely should shake up every person, especially every Jew, because as I said, it's an attack on being Jewish. You go to Israel, you're a target. Attack on a Jew anywhere in the world is an attack on all Jews. So these are wake-up calls. Wake-up calls of, as I mentioned at the beginning of the class, to exercise and stop being so petty, maybe reconcile with people that we don't get along with, Because Achdus and Avos Yisrael was always the way we were strong. Whenever we didn't have that unity, even Anshe David, even the great David HaMelech and his people who were good people, and they were fighting the right cause, but they fell. Nephilim, they fell because they were not united. And Anshe Avshalom, his enemy who was against God, they were strong because, like it says in this week's chapter, at the end of the chapter, it's also a fascinating episode. Not for now, I've discussed it, I believe, previous years. The Dar HaFlaga, the generation that builds the Tower of Babel. So look what it says there. Havav and Ischam, they come together, they're going to challenge God. And God says, I will confuse their language. Why? Because as long as they're together, why does he have to confuse their language? God can handle them. Because as long as they're united, there's a power to unity, even among Klippa, even among the negative. God instituted in the system that unity, even used by destructive forces, has power. And what do you need more? Look what Hitler was able to do. He united 100 million Germans, all for evil, and he had power. They were not divided. So as obscene as it was, but they were united. And then you find good people who can't get together. So when we see a crisis, we have to wake us up and what's a priority? Nothing can fight, nothing can destroy a Jew if we all stand together as one. And the Teva was also a model of unity. It says in some books that all creatures were there, and even Gar Zevim Keves, when Mashiach comes, it says the lamb will lie with the wolf. And not just Maimonides says it's a metaphor, but also actually, that was a taste of that was in the Teva. You had lambs and wolves. Because the Teva, in the language of Kabbalah and Chassidus, it says Bina, Pnimius Bina, reigned inside the Teva. Moichen de Gadlus. That force that is able to bring together opposites. So the Teva was a model for gathering. It was an assembly of every species, every human being, in order to be able to rebuild the world afterwards. And especially in this year called Hakel. Hakel, every seventh year, the year following Shemitah, sabbatical, was a year of Hakel, where the Jews gathered together, Noshim, Anoshim, Noshim, B'taf, even children, even newborn children, to hear the king's words that read Torah, again Torah, to infuse us with a deeper sense of awe that would sustain us through our lifetimes. So all these indicators of unity, of holding on to the strong powers of the letters of Torah and prayer, in the purpose of protecting us from all the floodwaters that may attack us. And the wise person, Chacham Einov Bereshe, the wise person, Areyas Anela, the wise person looks ahead, thinks ahead. You don't wait till the storm strikes. You do it early on. That's why we educate our children from the youngest of age, surround them. The more cloaks of holiness and sanctity you surround your children with, and yourself with, the more power you have when a storm strikes. And the best defense is offense. Offense means a teva. You have to have an ark. So ask yourself the question, what arks do you have in your life? And whatever the answer is, fortify them, build new ones, stronger ones. This could be joining a new Torah class, starting a class, hosting a class, anything that creates a type of oasis, a type of force that's not made of the material world, not connected to money and business, but something connected to divine, to God. These are the forces that we connect to and commit to. They carry us, especially when we need it most. So that's the lesson that we have as we enter the new year, the new world. Olam Chadash Ra, Noach saw a new world. It was terrifying on one hand. He messed up afterwards, he gets drunk in the process. That's another discussion. And but the point is that we have a new world, but we have to be wise and prepare ourselves to know how to deal with the challenges. And I'll conclude with a blessing, as I began, for our brethren, the Jews in Eretz Yisrael, that they should lo yonu v'lo yishon shem Yisrael, utza eitza v'sufar, davra davra lo yakum, that all conspiracies should be thwarted. God should protect Jews everywhere, especially there, and that the government there and the people in power should do what they have to do to eradicate this new plague. And we should do our part, because the battle, as I said, is not just a physical one, it's also a spiritual one, in fortifying our connection to each other, our support for everybody, for every Jew. And like the butterfly effect, what we do here has an impact in the entire world. As Maimonides says, that a person has to always see the world as equal scales. And one action tips the scale. L'kav schus, and brings Yeshua v'atzola, which means redemption and salvation, to you and to the entire world. That's the power that we have. So, I want to bid you all should be a very blessed week. Peace in Eretz Yisrael and the entire world. Permanent peace with the Gula Amitis Vashlema. So until next Wednesday, now we're back to the regular schedule at 8:15. If you have not left your email address, please do so. And any way we could be of help to build these arcs together, please reach out. And with that, it's always an honor and pleasure. Thank you very much. The Nayar, there's no applause? Okay.